Welcome to the 47th episode of the ClassCast Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens.
Today, we'll be speaking with Shane Lawrence, the host of the Ed Podcast. He's also a fantastic junior high school teacher in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Teaches drama, computers, film studies, art, and based on a conversation we've had recently, I feel like we could just ask him to teach anything and he'd probably be able to fill that in as well, because that's a pretty hefty list. So Shane and I first got talking about doing sort of a podcast swap recently, and he has a lot more experience in the podcasting sort of space than I do. So he's both been a wonderful resource, but also a really interesting voice in discussions about education recently. So Shane, thank you for taking the time to join us on the ClassCast Podcast.
Thank you very much, sir. Great to be here.
You know, we're gonna get into your education in just a second, but since you are an education podcast, host, and the Ed Podcast has been around 6.
This is year 6 for me.
6. So you were smart and got in maybe a little ahead of a boom. Now I feel like every single Twitter account I look at, somebody has a podcast. So
yeah.
So how did that piece start for you? Just because that's how I got to meet you,
right,
is through that. So how did you get into podcasting in the first place?
Kind of by accident, really. I started, I guess 6 years ago when our school was going to go to BYOD, bring your own device. And there was a lot of questions in the air about that in terms of, how does that work? Classroom management, just so many different things that we're thinking about. So I was having a lot of conversations with my coworkers, and I said to them, well, we should start a podcast. That'd be kind of fun. And it was one of those things where they're like, yeah, we should start a podcast. Kind of like, you see someone you haven't seen in a while and you're like, hey, let's go for coffee. Yeah, we'll go for coffee. You never call them, right? So, except I did, right? I actually did. So it turned out just by sheer, I don't know what, luck or kismet, what do you want to call it? But I wound up with 2 different people that I knew giving me recording gear. So
wow, nice.
Yeah, one guy's like, I got these 2 condenser mics, you can have them, and a little mixing board. I'm like, okay. And then another guy's like, yeah, I don't need this stuff over here. He gave me another mixing board and a couple of studio monitors. And I was like, okay, sure. So I was like, well, I got all the stuff here, may as well. So we just started this podcast on bring your own device. So in its first life, Ed was actually called Beyondcast.
Ooh.
Just, get it?
That's good.
It was terrible.
Hey, so it started as something maybe a little more like local, I guess. Like the intent was the intent to help like fellow teachers or the parents, or like what was that discussion?
It was basically about just making the transition, and the idea was that we could put it out there to help other schools that were considering similar kinds of implementation in their own student population. So we just talked over, how do we go about choosing the tech? How do we go about managing the tech? How do we go about working with the students? What's the point of doing this in the first place? So, some really good, strong navel gazing. And but the thing is, after the end of the first year, we did 8 episodes, not a lot, but we just kind of realized I realized it was kind of tapped out. It felt like we were just kind of circling after a while. So I decided, well, I'm just going to broaden this out and just make it more about just education in general. And I just started to kind of grow from there. I did once a month and once every 2 weeks and then weekly. And here I am in year 6. And I almost have an idea of what I want the show to be now. So, getting there. I'm getting there.
Well, and that's like a learn by doing moment,
absolutely.
This is my 47th episode, and I know a ton more about what I'm doing than I did obviously 46 ago. And if somebody says, so how do you do, and like any kind of technical questions about the mixing and things like that, like I said, that you've actually been very helpful in some of that, because I'm basically just winging it all the time. Like I watch a YouTube video, I try it, I don't love it, I do it again. So somebody said, so you have it all figured out? And I was like, I don't know, maybe in another 100 episodes or something, or I'll strike it rich and hire someone else to do the things I don't know. Right? Like, what episode number are you up to now?
I've done a lot of different kinds of episodes. So, in terms of like the conversations, which is like my core episodes, I'm on 156. But I think if you add up all the different podcasts I've made, because we do a monthly check-in, and that's on number 50, just recorded 56 a couple days ago. I think all told, it's around 250 episodes.
Okay. Wow.
So it's a few.
Yeah, it's a lot, and then that's awesome. So
Mhm.
through all of those conversations, all those recordings, I imagine that you've heard a lot of different things. Maybe you like, dislike, agree with, disagree with. My sort of line on how this podcast goes is that while obviously I always want a lot of people to listen, in the end, as long as I feel like I had a good conversation and I learned something,
Mhm.
then it was kind of good enough. Like I walk out knowing something I didn't before. Hopefully the guest has a good time. I always say sort of that's good enough, but you've obviously got a lot more time in recording, sort of going in there. What do you, for you, like, what's the redeeming value of doing an education podcast? Because this takes a lot of time and there's a lot of
Yeah.
coordination and things like that. So what keeps you going? Like what about this kind of conversation or doing this really makes it worth your time and effort?
Worth my time. Oh, good. Glad. I guess not what makes it worth the listener's time and effort. That's good. For me, it's people. Like I am just continuously and endlessly fascinated with what other people are doing. I can't describe it in any better way than that. I love to hear the kind of things that people are doing, just to know more. I'm an information gatherer. And so the more that I can learn about the many different corners and areas of the education profession, the happier I become. So whatever that is, I mean, every single guest that I've had on is just a little bit different than the previous one. I've never had, the exact same topic every time. I'm always looking for something different because I just want to know a little bit about that, a little bit about that, a little bit about that. So it's led me to some really great conversations. I've talked to everything from teachers who have been teaching for 6 months to teacher, what's the longest? I think I talked to a lady. She's been teaching math for like 45 years. And so much to learn on both ends of the spectrum, and then of course everything in between. So yeah, that's honestly what keeps me going, is just being able to sit at the feet of someone else who's an expert in something and just sit there and bask in that glow.
Right. Do you think that in those conversations, and this is where I think the focus of our podcast is it's both education, but it's slightly different, because I'm sort of going like very big picture on like what is education or what should it be and sort of what are we doing. And obviously, some episodes dig into more specific parts. I think based on what I've listened to and what I've seen, most of your interviews are with other teachers, like people working in schools, right? Like most of them.
Yeah, the vast majority.
Okay, so do you think those conversations, like, are you a better teacher as a result? I've been thinking about this since we spoke before. Do you think that doing this helps you to be a better teacher, or just in a sort of a broader sense, just more knowledgeable about school?
I think it makes me a better teacher, straight up. I don't think I've ever necessarily walked away from one single conversation and just like, felt this sudden like power up, I'm now a level 12 teacher. Like it's nothing like that. But the way I've always envisioned the conversations in terms of what I'm getting from them from a personal sort of practice standpoint is it's like, you've got the big bucket of experience, experience is water, and every conversation is just another drop in the bucket, right? It's just a little bit more, it makes ripples, a little bit more, and your bucket gets fuller over time. So for me, it's like every conversation is adding just a little bit more, and I can every now and then I'll take a step back and look and say, okay, now so what have I learned? How have I changed? So yeah, it's a slow, gradual process of change. And I mean, every now and then you're lucky and you get a revelation, and that's great. But for the most part, it's just that gradual process of growth. So that's how it's been for me, anyways. I mean, I'm a slow mover in a lot of areas of my life, and that's definitely one of them. I'm not. I don't go grabbing onto something and then just chasing off in one direction because I'm too interested in everything else that's happening, over there and over there and over there. So
that's, and I completely personal opinion, but I think that's probably a good way to be as a teacher, because one, you demonstrate enthusiasm and curiosity, which students can feed off of, but two, it becomes really easy to sometimes latch onto trends or new initiatives. Every, what do they say, every 20 years, like the pendulum swings, but even while it's still on its one side there, there's still so many different things that administrators, other teachers, that people want to do. And one of the things that I found is that sometimes, like I hit a point, I guess it was in the spring, late spring, early summer, I hit a point where I don't know what happened, if I got enough listeners or what it was, but I started to have people reach out to me and ask if they could be on the podcast. And I was like, well, that's fantastic. This is great. But what I realize is when people do that, it's usually because they have something very specific that they're promoting, which is fine. I mean, that's cool. And it can be a good conversation. But I also thought, if you're not careful about it, it's really easy to hear someone pitch something like that very enthusiastically, and we talk in depth. This is kind of long form. And I thought, it's a good thing that like you just said, I'm kind of a slow mover in making, big changes in how I do something, because otherwise these conversations for me would get really tricky, because every time I talk to someone, I'm like, oh, that sounds awesome. But I don't necessarily act on it right away. And if I did, this would actually be like a reckless thing for me to do because I would be chasing, I'd be chasing too many different targets all at the same time. Do you feel because you've talked to a lot of different people, and this might be an unfair question, so you can totally, dodge or deflect if necessary.
Sure.
I think as I've gotten more active on Twitter, which is in part because of doing the podcast, both trying to see what's out there and hear other ideas, and then occasionally it's promotional kind of stuff. I feel like sometimes people who are great at talking about teaching, I try not to say it out loud often, but I quietly suspect that they maybe aren't great teachers. And on the other side of it, I also know some people who are very good teachers who you probably couldn't pay to go on a podcast or to share their ideas on Twitter or anything else. And so I'm not saying that's all people are one or the other, but do you feel like you've had conversations with people who maybe are very good at the podcast or very good at talking about their job, but you suspect maybe they aren't, like they're talking the talk and not walking the walk, or is that something you haven't really run into?
Oh, I've definitely run into that for sure. I want to tread carefully here.
No names, of course. I'm just saying.
Well, there's those. What? No, I'm not gonna. But no, I think the thing is, one of the things I'm very curious about when I talk to people who are big in the education field, as far as being a consultant or a speaker, the thing I'm always interested in is the transition that they've made between being the classroom teacher and who they are now, and then B, how do they maintain that link to the classroom? Because you see a lot of these big thinkers and big talkers who haven't been in a classroom for 10 years, and you got to wonder, it's like, I don't think you're really a teacher anymore. I think you're a speaker, and that's fine. That's what you are. You've changed your career gradually, and you're still sort of education adjacent. But and in terms of relevance to my show, I really like having my own worst enemy. I want my show to grow, but I want to interview the people who are right on the ground level who maybe aren't as big. I like having the big people on too, the bigger names, because they have their own set of experiences to share too. And I'm working hard in terms of the craft of actually podcasting to really dig deeper into and through that sort of product level, where the speaker level, right, where it's just these are the things that I say, and I want to kind of get no, let's get underneath that now. So, and I would say that only now literally in the last 2 months, I think I've gotten to a point where I can get through that stuff now. I can, because I've had other experiences with some very forceful personalities, which were a lot of fun, but at the same time, I didn't really do much of anything. You just kind of talked, and I just kind of listened, and I didn't get to go anywhere with it.
Yeah. And it's a tricky thing for me. I know what you mean with that. And I also have to be careful, because sometimes when I get excited, I go, my mouth will run when I listen to some of my early episodes. I'm like, this is really great, except I'm talking 70% of the time, and so if people like me, then that was okay. But then I feel bad, in retrospect, I'm I didn't necessarily do that, the interview piece of that very well. And I hope I've gotten better at it. But I think it's a very different conversation when you're talking to people who are either in or out of the classroom. And then again, what makes that person sort of interesting, or, what brought them to your attention. I suspect that sometimes some of the loudest voices are not necessarily the strongest actors in the classroom. That doesn't mean it's something you don't listen to. A good idea is a good idea, no matter where it comes from. I just, as I have more people reaching out to me and saying, hey, you want to record a podcast, I think to myself, well, do I actually trust this person, and especially if I don't know them. So thinking about, that sort of dynamic, that there are obviously, good and bad teachers, good and bad speakers, et cetera. As a student, it might look different. We might all look at someone and say that person's a great teacher. and then maybe their own students don't love it or vice versa. For you, what do your students think about, well, maybe both you, like as a teacher, but like, do they know you do the podcast? Like, is this something that they're aware of?
For the most part, I would say no, probably. I mention it every now and then. I'm like a terrible self-promoter, just terrible. So, my wife says my wife's friends know more about my podcast than my friends do, because she's the one's like, oh, my husband's podcast, he's got so-and-so on it, you should listen. So she's very good about that. But me, no, I don't know if it's just humility or shyness or whatever. I've never been much for, going around saying I'm a podcaster, because it just feels weird to me. So,
yeah.
I mean, some of my kids do know, and, like I just made, like, I printed a custom phone case with my logo, my podcast logo on it. So, I show that to my students just as like, well, they need a demo so they can figure out how to do this. So I'm going to show them this one. So,
yeah.
So there's a little bit of promotion, I guess, going on here and there, but I mean, they're not my listening audience anyway.
That's true.
You know, podcast. I'm like, nah, it's about education. You think it was boring? They're like, okay. So, yeah.
So, what about your education? Both thinking about just what kind of student were you, and what was your experience like? But somewhere in there, I want to try to figure out how you landed both teaching the subject areas you do, but also doing the podcast. I told you normally ask about your education, then how do you use it? As a teacher, generally speaking, we're teaching for the most part the things that we've studied, et cetera. But you're teaching a lot of different things plus the podcast. So like, what was your experience like as a student? And then maybe how did that sort of lead you in the directions that you've ended up?
Wow. That's a whole lot of threads to weave together. I mean, as a student, like in high school and junior high, I was a good student. Yeah, I guess in air quotes, you want to put it that way. I did the work, showed up, got good grades. I wouldn't say I was a particularly thoughtful young man. I was kind of a little bit of a space cadet, I think I would say, just kind of floating through. But I mean, I guess I had a fairly easy go of it, at least from the academic standpoint. Socially, like I say to my kids sometimes, like, I know it's hard to believe, but I was kind of a nerd. And they're just like, yeah, we figured that, Mr. Lawrence. Thank you. Yeah. So, but really, I guess, it's funny. I had a really big interest in computers, and I wanted to work in the video game industry coming out of high school. And ultimately, what I really wanted to do was actually be a writer for video games, because I also had a real passion for writing. Turns out my writing is a lot better than my coding, because after a year and a half of computer science in post-secondary, I was just like, I've had enough of this. I'm done. Because I know you're not supposed to say that you're not good at, fill in the subject area, but I am not good at computer science. I am not. I was busting my butt weekends and nights and getting a quarter of the work done that my classmates were doing, and they were spending a tenth of the time that I was. So kind of took that as a message that, maybe this isn't the thing for me, and did an English degree with a drama minor. And that was just like coming home. That was awesome. It was so good. And of course, getting an English degree and with a drama minor, you kind of step out of the doors and you're like, well, now what? So it's weird, because I didn't like, I wasn't one of those kids who was like, I'm going to be a teacher when I grow up. I didn't honestly really think about it until right near the end of my first degree. And I thought, well, maybe education would be a good fit, and sort of, dip my toes in that. I was like, yeah, this is actually pretty good. So seemed like a good fit, and it was. It's always been about the kids for me, like 100%. So yeah, I tried it out, found that I felt pretty comfortable in a classroom, and so got my degree. And then, 1, 2, skip a few, here I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, with that, I'm also an English major, and I think, we record an episode of your podcast, and I think we talked about somewhere in there, how I sort of backed into this and wasn't even sure about teaching until I was doing it. How do you end up teaching all the different, I was an English major, I teach English, like I do public speaking too. And I keep asking them to let me teach a philosophy class just because that's like a more recent interest of mine, but when you're doing drama, computers, film studies, and art, how did that happen from an English major who was not entirely sure he wanted to be a teacher until, you were almost in it, right? I mean, like if the decision came late and you were in English, at what point did you start sort of fanning out?
Well, pretty much from the get-go. I mean, I've almost always had English in my teaching portfolio. I'm at a small school too, so that facilitates the necessity, year over year for teachers to have to teach just different things that are not in their subject area necessarily. So, I've been at one school for my entire career, 15 years, and this is year 16. And I've taught English from everywhere from grade 7 through grade 12. I have taught social studies 10, social studies 7. I have taught computers, again, all the way from grade 7 through 12. So it's just sort of whatever happens year to year. And especially when you're a new teacher in the school I'm at, you tend to kind of like, I call it you're the dumping ground. So it's like, well, we need someone to teach this course, so it's going to be you. So, and I always tended to fall into the tech stuff. And I mean, that was kind of where I was always pushing to, because it was just interesting to me. And it took me a while to sort of find exactly where I wanted to be, even in that set of courses. But I think the thing that's really helped me a lot is just understanding, first of all, that I have a way of doing things, and that's okay. I don't have to be like other teachers. And because of that, though, I mean, the difference between art and drama and film and computers is very small for me. They are all very creative based courses, and the tools and the mode of expression might differ, but ultimately this is about finding your voice and speaking out and being able to just share your ideas with the world. So just in different formats, whether we're painting something or whether we're doing something with digital tools, which I really enjoy doing, or whether we're, telling a story through film, or whether we're on a stage, it all feels very much of a piece for me. And so that's been really helpful just in my own sort of mental jigsaw puzzle coming together for me.
Yeah, so that's cool. And that's, I tell my students on the first day of class, all communication is persuasive, that there's no such thing as a time you're sharing information that, you're not trying to get a certain result. And I said, and you'll always be a better communicator if you know what that intended result's going to be. Yeah. But at the same time, as a result of that, I now basically believe that as an English teacher, especially teaching at the end of high school, 11th and 12th grade, where they've taken a lot of different classes, and in theory, fingers crossed, they've already picked up a lot of the basic skills. I can do anything in the class, because as long as we're reading and we're writing and we're thinking, we're speaking, like as long as we're doing those things, it's English class, right? So we do some biology, we do a lot of history and politics and some anthropology and things like that. But in my case, I have to wrap it all into one classroom, or into one thing. I still have to package it that way. And so I in one way, I admire your opportunity to do the different things. And another way, that might be horrifying because of the amount of prep required when they are legitimate different classes. How does that play out? I mean, like as a teacher, are you the busiest person in the building, or because some of these things, I don't know if you guys would call it like an elective, or how much of those are required versus optional courses? Like, does that turn down the intensity a notch or two, or are you just 100 miles an hour all the time to plan and prep for all these classes?
Well, I've been doing the courses that I'm teaching for a few years, so I have the benefit of at least, some planning that I can lean back on from previous years. So rather than planning from zero, I'm tweaking, and, usually every year I'll take a unit or two and throw them out and make some new ones. But in terms of having to make things from whole cloth every year, that thankfully doesn't happen. But I'll tell you, I mean, this year has been a blessing and a curse, because we've gone from a semestered system to a quarter system. I'm only teaching 2 courses right now, which has never happened, never had such a low number of courses. I've had semesters with 7 or 8 different courses. Whoa. Which, it's nuts. So So it's been really, really good because I can focus more. But on the flip side of that, it means that I've been like, oh, sweet, I got this time, I'm going to redo some stuff. So, I've been planning more than I have in a while, let's say. Just because I feel like I've got the space, because I'm not mentally divided amongst 6 or 7 different courses. I can just say okay, I'm going to focus right this semester, I'm teaching computer 7 and drama 8. That's it. And it's fantastic. So I would say my courses are looking better than they have in a while, just because I've been able to focus in on them. So planning like mad.
Yeah.
So it varies, it varies from year to year, and just, and how busy I am. I mean, there's times where too, it's like, I was just talking about this actually on an upcoming episode of my show. Just that balance between, how much time do you invest in, your courses and making them perfect and beautiful. And, when you do, that takes away from something else, because, I have limited resources. I'm not one of those crazy people who can work 20 hours a day and whatever all that entails. So yeah, anyway, all this to say, I think this year's going pretty good, and I'm feeling happy about life.
That's well, and it's good. And it's nice to be able to focus in that way. One of my most popular, probably one of the most popular, but certainly earlier on, probably last winter, early in the spring, I interviewed a guy, Tim, the shop teacher, and one of the things we talked about is he, within his his technology educator, he has it's everything. He teaches like a million different classes. He's got like wood shop 1, 2, 3, 4, and then he's got like electrical stuff and robotics and all. And so he's like the busiest guy in the building. But by the nature of the class, once you kind of get him set up and working on a project, you have some time to work within that classroom, because the kids need time to work on their stuff. But that was something that he had talked about, was just what a dream it would be to only teach 1 or 2 things at a time, because he has all these cool ideas for stuff he'd want to do, but he just doesn't have the time. It's just, he can't get to it. When you said you're on a marking period system, so do you actually, do the kids change classes every quarter now or semester?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Because that's not like my kids are going to take my class the entire school year.
Yeah, no. So that means actually next week is the last week that I'll be teaching my drama 8 class. Normally that would be for half a year. Now it's just for a quarter of a year. So yeah, I'm done with my drama 8 classes November 6th. And then we've got a break, and then come back, and then we teach another set of classes until end of January. Is that right? No, February, somewhere in there.
Yeah, probably. Guessing somewhere around there.
I know I've got the dates written down somewhere. Yeah.
Do you think that's ideal? I think a lot about this. I think that year-round schooling could be a good thing if you plan the breaks in it well, right?
Yeah.
People still need time off. You still need time with your family, you go travel, do whatever. But the idea of the giant summer break, and then, we could probably lose that part of it. But then the question comes in, how do you schedule the classes? Should kids, when I was growing up, I went to my core classes every day. Yeah. You went to English class every day, math class every day. Now I teach kids for a longer period every other day. And that took a little while to adjust to. But I have friends who work on, I guess, block, or I think they call it 4x4 scheduling or something, where they do first semester, second semester. You're now talking about changing every quarter.
Yeah.
And in my mind, from the outside, I think that probably works better for older students. If you think in a college setting, because you can really, you can dig deep, you can focus in, you can put sort of everything into one class, and then you switch over. I'm just thinking about, as for younger students, I feel like it's harder to hit that depth in the shorter period of time, but I have no experience with that. I could be completely wrong. How does that play out? Do you think that's an ideal way to schedule to help the kids actually learn?
It's funny, because I was talking today to an assistant principal in my building about this very thing, about, going back to semestered. The reason we're doing quarters is because it limits the cohorts in our building.
Okay.
So it's a COVID thing.
Right.
So we will be going back to semestered, but the difference isn't necessarily going to be in age, although, I think what you're saying is correct. As they get older, their ability to concentrate for longer periods of times increases. And so there is, potentially better benefit. But the clearest line that I'm seeing in our building right now is that core teachers options teachers love having the longer classes, and core teachers don't. So I was talking about this with my students, a couple of weeks into the quarter, in September, and just saying, how you doing? How's this going with, because they have social studies for, was it 160 minutes, I guess, which is, right.
Okay.
And I said, and I said, I know you're here a long time for drama. They're like, oh no, we love drama. It's great. We get, this is our relaxing time, not like they're lying around doing nothing, but it's time where they're not having to sit in a desk and just, stare straight ahead or whatever. So I think it's dependent on the course. on the actual course they're taking. Talking to one of our gym guys, who does like phys ed, and he's just like, oh, I love this. We just get on our bikes and we can go for like a 10K ride. It's sweet. So there's pluses and minuses. And like I said, I mean, my drama class this year is just, it's been just fantastic. Like I'm just bursting. It's so good.
Yeah. Well, and
yeah.
In a class like that though, right? Like, cause you got to think all the different things that are going to go into preparing. I mean, I don't know if you're going to do like a full production. I don't know if that's possible with social distancing or if you're going to record it, whatever.
Nope.
But even just the amount of time it takes to rehearse. Like I myself have never been an on-stage guy, but I did like technical production. Like I was the money guy. Like I raised money we did a big musical at my high school growing up. So we sold the tickets, did the programming, all the advertising, but I was around it all the time. Right. And so I saw all the work that was going in on that stage. I think it would be really hard to do that well in the little spurts, so for a drama class, like I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
But, like, as you pointed out for the history teacher, like 160 minutes straight with a 13-year-old, that's a nightmare.
Ryan, like I couldn't do 160 minutes straight in a social class. Like you should you should see me in staff meetings. I'm the worst. I'm like the worst example. Oh man. Okay, I hope my principal's not listening right
now. No, that's okay. Everybody knows teachers are the worst audience. Look around any faculty meeting and you will see the teachers in the room doing all the things that they get mad at their students for doing.
Yeah, phone down on their lap.
Yep. I'm usually grading papers. I'm at work. I have a lot of essays to grade. So when it's something really important, I'm listening. And when it's something like, well, I should just hear it. I can hear it while I'm grading an essay. So I usually have papers in front of me.
Good for you.
Well, yeah, it's the worst part of my job. Thinking about the scheduling, and maybe we'll sort of loop around and tie in one of the other big questions, but what do you think would be ideal? Because it sounds like you've taught in more different sort of scheduling formats than I have. Like since I've been teaching, it's just been block schedule, 90 minutes every other day. And I've never had any significant variation on that. I mean, now we're online, but it's not that different in terms of the basic schedule. What do you think would be best? Like if you were the superintendent, you said, here's how kids are going to attend their classes. What would you do?
Well, I would wave my magic wand so that options could be taught for a half a day and core would only be taught for single blocks. Like in my building, that would mean options are 160 minutes and then core classes would be 84. Which is how they used to be for high school. And then junior high was 42. So it's half of that. But yeah, just settling in like 84 for the core courses and then just half a day for all the rest of it. I think that'd be fantastic because I mean, I've talked to all the other options teachers and I mean, so much of our time is set in, is lost in terms of like, if you're teaching, home ec and you're having to pull out sewing machines and get all the fabric ready and everything else. And you've got, an 84-minute class. Well, you've just lost 15 minutes of your class. Right, which is a significant percentage. But if you've got, a whole morning, like, you're set, right? So, or if you're doing, cooking or anything in like work in woodworking, like it's really ideal. And I've heard nothing but like thumbs up from everybody about that. So that's how I would make it work. How would that work? I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah, no, but I mean, that's a good idea. And it probably would be, I would say for most kids, it'd probably be good for motivation too, because if they're presented with options that they're actually interested in, right? Their classes here with skills or things that, I want to be able to do or I want to learn. And I know I get to spend half my day there.
Yeah.
I have kids who right now are struggling a little bit because we're not doing any sports. Like they're doing I think they're doing practices, but it's limited and I don't know, but people don't realize, like I always feel like people outside the classroom don't realize how important it is for a kid to have, football or soccer or whatever it is, because I have so many students who their grades drop when they're not in season. And you think, well, you have all this time. And then all of a sudden it's soccer season or it's lacrosse or football. And the kids at school all day and then they're at practice all night. And then they still go home and get the stuff done just because they're in this mindset of like, this is my thing, like, and I'm grinding on it. And they want to keep their grades up and stay eligible, Right. And so the idea of being able to choose that class might be the kind of thing that helps them to get through that English or math class that they weren't loving. Like motivationally, it could be good. Plus it presents some more options. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I don't know how you do the details of it, but that's probably a thing worth exploring if we're serious about, quote unquote, kids' voice and choice. Like, I don't know if you guys are hearing that phrase a lot, but that's if I had
Yeah.
$1 for every time I've heard voice and choice the last couple of years, I'd have already retired. You could just work that into the schedule and let them spend 160 minutes in something
Yeah.
they're actually choosing.
Well, I think the other big piece of this too is, and speaking of words that you're hearing a lot lately, is just the wellness piece, right? I mean, this is having something where kids can get up and they can move and they can just work their bodies is, that's an important part of being well, versus, you're not going to have anyone walking out of, a half day class sitting in a desk, or they're going to be walking out saying, "Oh, I feel so energized." Yeah. Like that's not going to happen. Right. So, I mean, in my drama class, I work the kids hard. They're in the morning and they're, not every day, but a lot of days they're tired when they walk out. But that's great because they have the energy and focus to like sit, right? They just want to sit.
Yeah, now they're ready.
They're ready. That's right. You wear them down.
That's the classic principal's trick, right? As a high school principal, you put all the freshmen, you put as many freshman boys into PE first class of the day. Go run laps, go play basketball, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Get it out early, because if you can get as many freshman boys into that PE class in the morning, you just saved everybody a lot of stress for the rest of it. But maybe now, especially where maybe some of our options are limited because of the pandemic, having them have those opportunities to move. I think that's a disservice that we do in schools, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody. I do this, to myself through the school day, and maybe sometimes with students. But sometimes we forget that, like, there's a whole person, and we treat our bodies like it's just like a vehicle for a brain. Like, my body's just like a car, and the brain is really the only thing we're worried about. And like, that's not really how people. That's not how any living thing really exists.
Yeah.
But it sure is how we design school sometimes,
It
so
is.
to have drama, as a release from that could be, I don't know, maybe, maybe that's the shift. We need to remember that there's more to it.
Well, it's nice when you can get bodies moving in a classroom. I mean, it just, the thing that just jumped into my mind is, back in the day when I taught English 7, one of the things I would just love to do, and it was always an impromptu lesson because it was dependent on the weather, but I would wait until it was snowing. And then I'd be like, all right, stop. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to go outside for 10 minutes and we're going to play in the snow. And they go outside and they play in the snow and they come back in and like, okay, now we're going to write some poems about snow. And I mean, simple, right? Not a lot of prep for it, but they come in and they write this amazing stuff and they're energized and they're ready to go. And they've got the feel of snow in their bodies, they're cold and they're red cheeks and they're just, it's good. I mean, the other teachers would hate it because my kids would be like yelling and screaming down the hallway and they're like tramping snow and mud all over the school, but it was for a good purpose, right? A good cause. And so that physical piece is huge and we do forget about it.
Yeah. And I mean, and the outside thing is great. And it's gotten harder recently as everybody's been a little tighter, with school security. I remember when I started, when I was in high school, my school did outside campus. During your study hall or lunch, you could sign out and just go outside. And we had like these big old trees around, like, there was like the loop where parents would like do drop-offs or whatever. But in the middle of it, it was just a big like lawn basically. And you could just go outside and hang out. And like people, they had, the only real rule was you couldn't leave the actual school property. And you weren't allowed to throw anything because somebody got hit in the face with a football and, whatever. But so everybody got really into like hacky sack because you could just stand there and do it, and there was a lot of like people playing guitars and stuff. And it was awesome. And you could just go outside. And now I describe that to students now and they look at me like you're both crazy and really old. And I'm like, those may be true, but there really isn't anything stopping you from doing this right now, except that we have sort of this general concern for your safety, which is probably disproportionate. Like, I'm not going to say it's unfounded. I'm just going to say we're probably more afraid of that stuff, especially at the high school level, than we probably need to be. And you would all feel happier and less anxious if we let you get into the sunshine once in a while during the day. But we just don't do it, and it's even hard to take your class out. Like, you have to prearrange and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know that that's good for anybody really. So, all right. So, we've talked a little scheduling, hearing you take kids out to play in the snow and I mean, you're teaching all these different classes. So no pressure, but given your experiences and what it sounds like your teaching style is, I imagine that you're going to have the best answer I've ever heard for what is your ideal school. No pressure at all. No, but no,
I am not, but we'll go ahead anyway.
Yeah, no, but, and you don't have to stick with one thing, like I said, but
Yeah.
if you were given a budget and a building, but it didn't have to be a school building, like you could pick your building or you could pick your spot, what would it be? You know, like what grade levels or what do you put everybody together? What kind of stuff would you do if you just had a total blank slate to create what you thought was the ideal or one of the ideal educational institutions?
Okay. So starting with the building, I mean, this is kind of a bugbear for me is I hate ugly buildings and just classrooms that are these closed in boxes. So I think I would first like hire out to a top flight architect and get, I mean, we're talking, you're giving me an unlimited budget here, right? So this is going to be like a beautiful building with lots of daylight coming in, lots of common areas. Rooms would be arranged in such a way that if you want desks, great, you can have desks. If you want to be able to have kids seated on other objects, great. So, flexible seating, I guess we can call it that. I think I would want it to go beyond that, but just having spaces that are just flexible in and of themselves for students, and places where students can relax and where they can study, where there's quiet places and noisy places. And gosh, in terms of the actual classes themselves, I want smaller class sizes. I mean, who doesn't? But I would love to have smaller class sizes just because you can get more personal. And from a stress standpoint, there's less marking. And I mean,
what's your ideal? Just not to derail the ideal school. Just since you brought up class size, for you, what's your ideal class? And probably varies by subject area or by class.
Yeah,
but, you know, I always say for me, I want 16 or 20 because it makes for easy grouping and it doesn't. It's not crazy on the grading. Like 16 for me is perfect.
Yeah,
but I'm never going to get it. So
no, dream on, right?
Yeah.
Well, I have for drama, it's 14. It's that's just comes from personal experience. 14 is the magic number.
Okay.
For my computers class, I would like 15, 20 probably would be nice. Just less so we could do more. I mean, the weird thing, my upcoming drama 7 classes, in one class I have 10 and in the other I have 33. So, whatever. Gotta figure that one out. But
well, we're going to do a lot of street scenes and some of you are going to be extras.
Background. That's right. Okay. All right. So yeah, I would like smaller class sizes. Yeah. Cause I think you can do more and you can, have more time individually with each student. And that is that's so invaluable to me. I would want to have time in the class, like again, unlimited budget. I'd like to be able to pay teachers well, but give them half a day every day for prep so that they can get things ready and organized and really knock it out of the park like every day. And that would be time that teachers could actually, work on their own if they need to, but also really try and have an environment where teachers can collaborate. Because I think some of the best things come out of those times when teachers are able to connect and do, cross-curricular learning, project-based learning, that sort of thing that involves different areas. Because I think, it's very efficient to have different subject areas, but it's also it's kind of false in a lot of ways. It's not the way the world works. Every now and then in a class, we'll be talking about something and I'll just bring in math or science and thinking, Mr. Lawrence, you can't do that. I'm like, why not? We're like, well, that's science and we're in this class. I'm like, doesn't matter. There's no subjects in life.
Yeah. That's exactly it. And the interdisciplinary piece.
Yeah.
And can be done a lot of different ways. And so that, and you don't have to necessarily go into those details, but that's something that I'd always thought about a little bit. And, I said, like, you have the conversation enough, you start learning things. That is a thing I believe 100 times more strongly than before I started doing the podcast, because so many people have referenced what you just said, but in different ways. Like everybody sort of says a different way, but that it's kind of false. It's inauthentic the way we break them down. So yeah. So we've got a beautiful building, smaller class sizes, more planning time, and less division, or sort of forcing the subject areas.
But with the actual time to implement the complexity that requires. because I don't know how many PD sessions I've been at or how many times you hear someone talking about, you should do cross-curricular, get together with other teachers. And it's like, can we have some time for that? No, you can't. It's like, well, then I'm not going to do it because the amount of time it takes is enormous.
Yeah. This is hard to do.
Yeah.
I always, I always thought it would be cool. And I don't know, maybe you might be more into this than me just because you're already covering a lot of different sort of skill areas in the different classes. But I've always felt like if I could just pair up and it was me and like a physics teacher who was really good at math, like I would just like for me and that person to just have the kids for the whole day, because I'm also then more inclined to give them break times because I have them all day. When I only have you for 90 minutes, like we got to do all this stuff and I only have that time. Like, but if you could give me somebody who balances like the areas that I don't know as much about, you could really just have a few people, you know what I mean? And I don't know that you'd have to schedule it that way, but man, if I could just pair up with somebody who's really good in like math, physics, chemistry, like the areas where I just don't have as much knowledge or skill, we could knock out a lot of stuff. And then that interdisciplinary piece gets so much easier because it's just you and this other person and you're always doing it together. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to become something you force for 3 weeks. We'll do this project. Like you're just always doing it, which might make it work a little better or at least seem more authentic.
Yeah.
I'm doing air quotes on the word authentic for everyone.
Yeah. Well, that's its own challenge, but the other piece too that I would really want to have in a school is just strong connections to the community. So, the best moments I have in my classes are when I have other people from the community come in and, for lack of a better way of putting it, they teach a class, whether it's just sharing experiences. And I have to talk about film studies now. And if Brad Schreffler is listening, a good friend of mine, he's going to be having a drink right now because that's what he does every time I mention film studies on a podcast. So there, got that out of the way. But one of my favorite times of year is the tail end of my film studies 9 class. One of the curricular objectives is that they have to make career connections to the stuff they're learning about. So I'm like, okay, you're going to make a presentation and you're also going to find someone in the community, and I help them with this, but find someone in the filmmaking community to come in and talk about that role. And those are like the last 2-3 weeks of film 9 is just fantastic because we just have guest speaker after guest speaker, and they come in and they talk about, effects, makeup, or Steadicam operation, or cinematography, or acting, or directing, or screenwriting. Had one guy who was an animal trainer who worked with like all the major productions in North America. So, just really awesome. Cool people like that. And that's, and from that too, I'll get my kids placed on movie sets on a pretty regular basis. So, this is my example, but just having any kind of a connection to the community like that is just really powerful, whether that's you're, connecting to local charities to create fundraisers, or whether you are, seeking, to connect. Like there's a group at our school connects with like people who are involved with social justice, and they've made connections both locally and globally through their own actions. So I would want a school that facilitates that and encourages it. And I think that would really strengthen just the school community, and it would also just broaden out the learning. When I ask my students, what did you learn this year? They never say anything about what I taught them. It's always about what the guest speaker says, right? Which is fine. I'm cool with that. Yeah. It's like, well, at least you learned something, right?
So just remember who got that guy in here, right? That's
yeah. So, and the final piece for me. No, 2 final pieces. I made notes.
Oh, nice.
I don't do very often, so I have to pat myself on the back about that. But I would want a stronger path on arts and on the arts, and also the career paths that go along with that. Because I had this conversation with a student just a couple of days ago, because she is just a phenomenal artist, and she's getting better all the time. Like if she's not paying attention in class, it's not because she's on her phone. It's because she's drawing something. She's working on some artwork. And she's been just like every second I see her of every day. She's using grade 10 now. And from grade 7 on, she's just like draw all the time, always improving. Anyways, I was talking to her yesterday. I'm like, just please tell me when you graduate, you're not going to be a nurse or an engineer. Because how many times does that happen? You got these kids who are just amazing in the area of the arts, but they have not been encouraged to pursue that as a career because they don't envision it as a career. They don't see people doing it as a career. And it drives me crazy, right? Get these kids coming out of film and they're just amazing. They're better than me by a long shot. And what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to be, whatever, not an arts focused thing. I'm just like, drives me crazy because the vision is lacking in the students' mind because they don't experience that. So,
and probably nobody, I don't want to say nobody promotes that, but those are the kinds of things that if you say, I'm going to do this, everyone's like, oh, cool. So what's your backup plan though? Because, no one really gets to do that, and,
yeah.
And I mean, and it's not that it's crazy to have that conversation either, but you don't necessarily have to have that conversation too many times or too early before you have effectively undercut what that kid was actually good at or into. So yeah, I mean, creating both the pathway through the classes, but also maybe having those connections. And maybe that's where the value of that community connection is really important.
Absolutely.
Because then they actually see someone who's doing it. So it's not just some pipe dream of, somebody might do that. Like, no, I know someone who does this job.
Yeah.
It probably has a really big impact. I mean, I don't know how you keep track of kids later on, but I would imagine that you probably have at least a handful more kids who stick with some of those ideas and some of those passions and jobs because they've had that connection. Like, I feel like it'd probably be harder for them to let go of it than someone who never had a connection with like an adult who is paid for this job.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And getting back to the idea of, backup plans. I mean, when students ask me that, what about a backup plan? I'm like, youth, your lack of age is your backup plan. Try it for 2 years. If you don't like it, oh no, you're 20. It's like,
yeah, that's, but oh my gosh, I actually had a kid say this to me. I think it was last year, the year before. And I don't remember the exact context of the conversation, but it was something very similar. And I said, you could just do it. If it doesn't work, you can change your mind. And it might have been about college majors. And I was just pointing out, most people change their major, like this happens. And his I just kept adding. I just went to a minor and another minor and whatever. But he goes, yeah, but if I change the major, I probably spend an extra year in college. And I was like, well, yeah, and I didn't want to be crass about it. I'm like, dude, your family has the money. Like, that's not the end of the world. I'm not telling you to waste the money. I'm just saying, like, that isn't your limiting factor. For some people it is, and it's not for you. And his response to all of it was, but think of what that does for my lifetime earnings potential. Yeah, I give up the first year of a career, which means if I retire at the same time when I'm older, I give up the last year, which might be the one I make the most in. And I was like, all right, buddy, just get out the door. Like that's how the conversation ended. I was like, all right, just get out of here. But that's, I don't know if that's really a thing that you need to think about that hard when you're 16. Like, it's not bad that you're aware of it, but when you're 16 and you're shooting down your own dreams on the basis of what happens to my lifetime earnings potential if I try it, like,
what's the monetary value of a dream you never attempted?
Yeah, like, I don't know. If that's how we want to approach this, then I think we just have to get comfortable with more kids being anxious and depressed, because at that point we've put that on them. Like, that is not a thing that you need to be worrying about when you're 16, unless you're already planning to be a guy in finance. Like, if you're into film, just go for it, at least for a little while.
Yeah.
Do you feel just, and I know we got another piece of your ideal school here, and I do appreciate you have both notes, but also it's a very good answer. So I don't want to derail that. I'm just curious, thinking about like the way you're talking about this, and it's kind of inspirational and you're making those community connections. What's the feedback you get from parents? Like, are the parents on board and they love it? Do you ever have someone who goes, well, that's nice, but Johnny's going to be a doctor. So like, do you ever get pushback, or do people buy in?
No, people buy in. I mean, it's because one of those things that's like, the kids are there because they want to be there in that course, right? So because they want to make movies. So, I've never had, the only pushback I get from parents is, sometimes we watch a lot of movies in class. So every now and then they'll say, well, why are you watching this movie? So that movie's got a naughty word in it. You shouldn't show that, that kind of thing. So, but I don't want to get on that.
No. Like, I was just curious, because with that piece, like, I think it probably, the way you're doing this probably has a huge impact on those students. But when you start having huge impacts on students, parents take notice. Like,
that's true.
If you have minimal impact and give everyone a B+ or an A-, especially the A-, like, no one, you never get a parent email. You never, as far as being a teacher, your job is very easy because I don't make a big impact. I gave you the A-. I never have to talk to anyone about it ever again. But that's probably not what we're really in it for if you're a good teacher. So I just assume you're hearing about it more often than maybe somebody else.
Well, I mean, there's the odd time I've had the awkward conversation about, my daughter thinks that she wants to be a filmmaker, but so can you just tell her that that's not a good career path or something like that? I've had that once or twice. I'm just like, I don't think I can tell them that, it's kind of, and I've had conversations with students about this where they're like, I really want to be a filmmaker, but my parents want me to do fill in the blank with reasonable career. So, I've had it more actually from the students' point of view where they had said, this is what I want to do, but my parents want me to do this other thing. And it's hard for me to be like, well, you just tell your parents to take a hike. I can't. That's what I want to say sometimes.
But you start talking about how you split the difference, or, you could do a little of both, or.
Yeah. I try and be as tactful as I can about it. But, the subtext, if you can read the subtitles of what I'm saying, it's always like, go for it, do it.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it should be, because if you don't believe that, then if you don't believe it, they're not going to believe it. And, part of being a good teacher is being a little bit of a salesman. And so, you probably have to at least be implying it, even if you're not directly stating it. All right. So I did get us off from the ideal school. I apologize. The way you're talking about it now, I'm feeling inspired. Like I want to go be a filmmaker. So, but so the big community connections, creating the path through, I think you said, sort of the arts areas, like the more creative fields. And you said you had one more, and I don't want to miss it because I blabber too much.
Well, it's the last one on my list simply because it's the one I understand the least, but I recognize it as probably one of the most important things in education, which is equity. So I just wrote on my notes, equity ? And then my little subheading is, I would want really smart folks providing good solutions regarding equal access to the school. Because nothing would break my heart more than to just see a bunch of, upper middle class people walking through my door and nobody else. Like I would want to draw, on as broad a community as possible to provide as much opportunity as possible to as many people as possible. So that I don't understand very well how that piece works. Like you, I teach in a fairly affluent community. So, the poor kids are the ones who only have 2 cars sitting in their driveway. So I would want to get someone sort of in a position, in sort of a planning board or whatever you want to call it, but that would have that understanding, where I would certainly be seeking a lot of those conversations just to understand how best to go about doing that if I was going to be creating this school. So because I would want it to be as diverse population, across all race, gender, finance, the whole thing.
Yeah. And that, is probably the biggest conversation that we're either having or should be having in education right now. And it's, it's late, but better late than never kind of deal. And I think that pandemic issues in some ways are forcing that back into the forefront in terms of kids' access to internet, access to, think of all the things that schools do that when you're not in school, you don't get. And so whether that's meals or access to a social worker, a counselor, all these different things. So, I mean, it's been part of that conversation, but I don't know if there's one answer. And so, your idea of like having a panel or having somebody that focuses in on your school is probably just a guess, probably the best way to do it though, because what's going to work in one place is not necessarily going to work somewhere else. Yeah. Equity in one place does not equate to equity everywhere else, and so that's that whole like equity, not equality thing. So if we're acknowledging that different people will need different things, then we probably need to do it differently in different schools as well. Which sometimes makes this tricky from a policy perspective. Like, I don't know how you guys are set up, but I think we're up to 17 high schools in my county. And so it's all run by one school board, one superintendent. And we add a new high school about every year or two. Like it's a fast growing area.
Wow.
Like we just opened, I think one this year, one last year, 2 years before that. And that makes it very difficult because when you're the guy in charge, you say, look, well, here's the plan. But it makes it really difficult to recognize that, from one end of the county to the other, people aren't living in exactly the same place. Like, yes, it's kind of the same community, but, and how do you write a different policy for each one of those schools if your job is to cover all of them? So the idea of having a specialist, having someone there might be the best way to do it. I don't know. I don't know if anybody's found the best way yet. And if they have, they certainly need to sell more books. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That is a good question. And with a program like you're sort of suggesting, where, I mean, some of it almost sounds more like a university sort of setting. We just have nicer buildings, and think even at state schools, there's usually at least one or two really nice buildings. They got to have something to put on the brochure. I don't know why we don't try to do the same thing with your public high schools, but from the building to the extra time and your options and electives and all the rest, that creates some choice. And I think one of the hardest things to do in any kind of choice, whether it's choices with classes within the school or choices between schools, is to figure out how you can do that equitably to make sure the kids are getting the best out of the choice. Like, to give someone a choice is great, but if they're not actually in a situation to take advantage of the options, then you didn't really do a whole lot for it, And so I think that's a smart thing to have on your list, because getting the right kids, or I don't say the right kids, every kid's the right kid, but getting getting the right community sort of in a school like that would probably be very important to its success.
I imagine it would be. I mean, it's I could see something like this. I mean, again, we're talking about unlimited funds, right? So, I mean, this is just, we're not talking.
I want a school on the moon.
That'd be all right, actually. I'm a fan of that idea. But I could see a school like this also, being able to help students get into post-secondary, even from a financial standpoint. I mean, I'd love to be able to offer, like, I guess, I don't know what you call them in the States, but bursaries or scholarships, that sort of thing. So,
okay, yeah.
Help students continue their learning path as well. And even, I mean, okay, now I'm thinking out loud here, but I mean, it would be really nice to have schools that allow students to explore their passions a little more deeply too, so they can actually have a clear understanding of what they want to do. And I mean, that's not something I think you can do super well, at lower grade levels, but as you get in high school, I mean, the kids are getting a pretty clear picture of what they want to do. So it'd be nice if you could provide sort of community connections to mentorship in those specific fields. And I've talked to teachers who do that, actually, who have, experts come in to help foster a student's love of whatever it is.
Yeah. And if you maintain some of those relationships, you also would have the opportunity to revert back to like a work study program. Or, I mean, I did an interview with a guy who's all about classical education. But he thinks of that as like sitting in Oxford and doing the classic lit and learning Latin and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, but that was just like the rich people and a handful of really smart people. Like, the average person went to very little schooling, up until a few years ago. If you're lucky, you got through a few grades, you kind of learned to read, and then you did an apprenticeship of some sort, or you did labor. In a model similar to what you're suggesting, if a kid wants access to an opportunity that you can't actually facilitate in the building, or, it's just cost prohibitive, we can't dedicate a whole room to this. There isn't to have that connection, to be able to essentially set the kid up with a little internship, go over there because this company's already doing it. So now you can work there. They get free labor. You get to learn it. And we've got to, help to foster that relationship, provide the opportunity without necessarily being on the hook financially for we didn't buy all the gear and dedicate the room. We just make sure we maintain that opportunity for you. Would be great. That just requires, having that community on board. And, at that point you need like a liaison or something in the building where that's their job to do it.
Yes.
But man, that sure would be good if that was somebody's job in the school, just to, they're like wow, this is an old word, but the Rolodex, they're the person that just has those connections, they know the guy for whatever you need in your building. Like, it would be really nice to have someone like that.
It's funny. I remember that actually, bringing that up in a conversation with one of my guests, a long time ago, but that very notion of having, like a community outreach person who does exactly that. That would just be, it'd be so cool. Yeah. It's like, I need my kids want to learn about, whatever it is, third world management of water supplies, get me somebody. They would just kind of go, that'd be like, oh, so awesome.
Yeah. And they're like, oh, we got the guy. Yeah. Everybody says, let's do project-based learning. And you're like, well, that's cool, except I'm an English teacher and I've never done that. So there's no such thing as an authentic project done in my room when I haven't done it myself. So, even my authentic stuff is still really just kind of acting and pretending. I'm just doing it in a different way. But if you could make that connection with somebody who does that work and really knows what that entails, now project-based learning becomes a thing that can actually be authentic and maybe actually set someone up on a more legitimate career path. It's not just, a fun project that helps you learn. This is like a real thing that you could do, but you have to have that person with the actual on the ground experience to come in and do it. But that would really, you know, breathe some life into the idea of project-based learning, because teachers would not be limited by their own experiences, you know. And I think that that's something we run into a lot. Most teachers, you know, most people finish college and became a teacher, and that means they have done very little that wasn't school. You know, maybe you had a summer job, but you've always been a teacher. So
I never even thought of that before, but you're right. It's like, man, now I feel like a heel. It's like, all I've ever done is school.
Yeah. I mean,
I've never had a real job.
I've done a ton of different summer jobs. Like I've done a lot of different stuff, but I've never had to do it for more than a few months at a time. So while I can give like hey, here's what that's kind of like, I don't really know, you know? And so that idea that when they say, well, make it authentic. And I'm like, well, when you're talking to a cafeteria full of teachers in the faculty meeting and say, make it authentic, you probably picked the wrong crowd for that, because these are people who went to school and then stayed in school. So what they were doing was already authentic to them. And it's kind of hard to ask them to do something otherwise. I mean, you can ask, but just remember they're faking it, which is why I always, when we talk about authenticity in the classroom, I almost always do air quotes with it. Not because I reject the idea, just because I don't think we're set up to actually do that and be honest about it. It's always pretending unless you find someone who really does that work. And I think maybe it's too hard or too time consuming to do that. But if we had the liaison, the Rolodex guy, you know, all of a sudden that becomes something that we can do a little more consistently and probably a whole lot better. But only of course if we had our own schools, that would be it. So all right, so hey, we're gonna wrap up here in a moment. I want to ask you about your books and movies, either your favorites or things you'd recommend. Before we hit that as the finishing note, is there anything that we either skipped that you wanted to talk about or mention, or is there anything that we did talk about that you think we did a terrible job of? Well, not you, you've done great, that I did a terrible job of, or accidentally, deflected you away from. Is there anything else that you feel like we missed or you want to clarify?
Ryan, I think we nailed it.
I agree. And I give you all of the credit in the world for it. Just for general interest, it gives a little peek into maybe your interest and personality, but it's also something that listeners can check out. And actually, I end up with a lot of cool things to watch and read from this. But what are a few books and or movies that you really like that you'd recommend? It could relate to education or just anything in general.
I guarantee it does not relate to education. So there you go. I'm not a big watcher. Yeah, fair. Okay, fine. Well, I'm going to recommend a film called two films. The first one's called The Florida Project, which was robbed of Best Picture when it came out a couple of years ago. It's an incredible movie. I cried like a baby. I haven't cried like that since I was like 8 and watching Old Yeller. Like, holy smokes. Great movie.
I've heard the name. And that is literally all, like you said, and I was like, yeah. And I was like, nope, that's it. I've just heard the name. That
really, really, really good film. Okay. I could sit here and tell you tons about it, but I'll just leave it at that.
No, that's fine. I will watch.
And the absolute flip side of that is it's actually something I found from my film studies class. We do a unit on animation. And Disney is like, it's not allowed in that unit because we already know Disney. So I'm always trying to find different forms of animation, different, stuff off the beaten path. And I found this gem. It's French. It's called A Town Called Panic. And it's like if you let a 5-year-old write a movie and then got adults to make it. That's kind of this film. Okay. And it is charming and hilarious and so weird. And it's all animated with like toys. There's 3 main characters. There's a horse, a cowboy, and an Indian named Horse, Cowboy, and Indian. And
perfect.
The gist of the plot is that some underwater alien creatures have stolen their bricks and they need them back. And it is so strange and wonderful. Like I got a stupid grin on my face now just thinking about it because it's so great.
Is it family friendly?
Absolutely.
Nice. Okay,
although it is subtitled, so I don't know. Oh. I don't know if there's a dubbed version or not.
Yeah. As you're describing, I'm thinking like my son's 4 and he loves story time at night. Like we tell some really random weird stories. And you're describing this, I'm like, Oh, he would eat that up like that.
Oh, it is so strange. And just weird stuff happens. And it just keeps going by. They're like, there's no explanation. It's just, yep, that's just this weird stuff that's happening. And that's just the way this world works.
Nice.
But if there's a dub version, strongly recommend it. Otherwise, you got to be a pretty fast reader because it goes by really quick.
Okay.
So
There's a Town Called Panic.
Yeah. Great book or movie. And speaking of books, though, I love to read. I don't read a lot. I'm going to blame that on my young children, just for now. That's the reason why. But the books that have managed to kind of keep me going are basically everything by Claire North, the author, and the best book to start with hers is the first 15 lives of Harry August. She writes literature like it's not, I wouldn't put it in the same vein as just like sort of pulpy, pure sheer entertainment. It's always kind of very literary in its quality, but always has sort of a sci-fi or fantasy twist to it. And she takes those little, like the first 15 lives of Harry August is about a man named Harry August who lives the same lifetime over and over. So like, say born 1947, dies 2017, let's just say, right? And then when he dies, he's born again in 1947 and lives that same period of time over and over and over again, but remembers his previous lives.
Ooh.
So he essentially becomes older and older and older. And that's the base level of this conceit. And she takes it just to an incredible level of depth. And it's wonderful. And she does that with all her books. So the other one that I really like is The Sudden Appearance of Hope, which is about a woman who nobody can remember. So she walks in a room, says hi, walks out of the room, and then she's forgotten. And again, it's a simple premise, but she takes it to really, really, she just takes it to all these places you'd never expect. And it's a fantastic read.
Cool.
So yeah, every time I pick up a book by Claire North, I'm always pleased. And I just, that's my jam.
Nice. Those all sound like great recommendations. And you did it without doing the sort of the hipster thing. Like when people give me recommendations that I've never really heard of or seen, a lot of times it turns into like, oh, well, I've been reading this since back when, like, people take a lot of pride in being the first to something,
Yeah.
And I'm like, these all sound great. And I've never heard of any of this. And you didn't even make me feel bad for it. So I appreciate that. That's really good. It's easy to do, especially on the film one. I feel like people do that a lot. Like, oh, you mean you haven't seen blah, blah, blah. And I'm like,
oh, no.
Nope, I guess I'm just a big idiot.
No. For me, it's always just such a joy when I can find stuff like that. And I can say, look at this great thing I found.
Yeah.
That's my approach all the time. It's like, just try something new. Like I love watching my kids seeing something they haven't seen before. And, I always tell them, like, I don't care if you hate it. You don't have to like it. But when they do, I get a little boost of it.
That's good. Yeah. I actually say that a lot in English class. And I did it more when I taught more literature. Now I do a lot more nonfiction, like the AP Lang class, but I still tell them this, but it comes off a different way with nonfiction. But I tell them, like, when we're studying literature, like you don't have to like it. Like I didn't pick it because I thought you'd like it. I picked it because I thought it was great and you'd learn a lot from it. I also really hope you like it. But if you don't, that doesn't actually mean that this doesn't work. Like the number one job was to learn something about culture and language and writing and the rest. The number two thing was hopefully you enjoy it. And if you put number two before number one, then we read maybe some stuff you like, but I probably haven't taught you as much as I could have along the way, and that's sometimes that's a tough sell, but I think we can do that sincerely. Sometimes you get a few extra kids who will fight through a book that they're not loving just because they recognize there maybe was other value in it. And that's how I felt about a lot of stuff I had to read in school. But when somebody made the value clear to me ahead of time, I was more likely to play along and finish the book. So try to do that. What, just out of curiosity, since film studies teacher, what's your all-time personal favorite movie? Like if you had to pick one movie, you're like, that's it. What's your favorite movie?
Moulin Rouge.
Really? All right.
Moulin Rouge. Bottom line, I love every aspect about this film, and yet I fully recognize that it's a polarizing film. Like a lot of people just hate it, and I'm like, yeah, I can see why. Absolutely. I didn't like it the first time I saw it, but then I saw it again. I was like, I like this, and now it's just like after I watched that film, I'm just exhausted. I'm just emotionally, I'm spent.
Awesome.
So
that's
absolutely
good.
love it.
Yeah, I think I've actually seen it twice. They were both a while ago.
I can sing the whole thing, man.
I think my wife really likes it. I think.
Oh, it's so good.
I shouldn't have said that because it might have been an ex-girlfriend who liked it, and so hopefully she's not. Hopefully she doesn't listen. Editing that line out.
Just hate listening to your podcast.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Ryan
that's
guy.
off now. All right. So let's wrap this thing up. Shane, thank you for taking the time to talk. This has been great. A lot of good stuff, both about school and how it is good or how it could be better. A lot of good stuff in the beginning there about podcasting. I really appreciate you taking the time. We've taken care of my priority, which is learn some things. And I think we've also generated some stuff that will help a lot of listeners as well. So thank you. Mm-hmm. Where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter. I'm at the Ed Podcast, and my website's theedpodcast.com. That's pretty much it.
There we go. And he is a knowledgeable and accessible guy. So if you like what you're hearing, I suggest you check out the Ed Podcast. And then, obviously you can reach out as well. This has been the 46th episode of the ClassCast Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. You can find this podcast on pretty much every major streaming service, plus at classcastpodcast.com and through the web app at listen.classcastpodcast.com. Thank you very much and have a good day.